wasn't supposed to exist in his world. That truth sat heavy on my chest the moment his eyes landed on me, cold, sharp, and merciless, like a predator recognizing prey. And yet somehow, the first time our paths crossed, I was holding nothing more than a tray of porcelain teacups, my trembling hands trying desperately not to spill. I was the maid, the girl who blended into shadows, who lived on silence and obedience. Nothing about me screamed important. Nothing about me screamed danger. I wasn't the kind of woman mafia bosses turned their heads for. But fate, cruel, reckless fate, has a way of dragging you into storms you swore you'd never walk into. My name is Elena Moretti, 22 years old, daughter of no one important, servant in the mansion that smelled of gunpowder and roses. I had been working in the household for nearly a year, invisible among the silk suits and iron gazes of men who killed as easily as they breathed. I knew my place. Clean, serve, and vanish before anyone remembered I was there. And then there was him, Sebastiano Russo, the man whose very name made other men lower their heads. The undisputed head of the Russo crime family. A legend built on blood, whispers, and power. His presence swallowed entire rooms. He was tall, dark-haired, with sharp Italian features that could have belonged to a sculpture, if sculptures bled and carried guns. His voice was velvet-coated in steel, and his silence spoke louder than most men's fury. No one dared question him. No one dared breathe wrong around him. And I, foolishly, naively, had caught his eyes once too many. That night, the air was suffocating with cigar smoke and danger. I remember balancing that tray in my shaking hands, sweat dripping down my back, when he looked at me, not through me, but at me. His gaze pinned me against the wall of reality, daring me to exist in his line of sight. I didn't know then that my life would split in two from that moment forward. Before Sebastiano Russo, and after, I had grown up ordinary. My mother had been a laundress, my father a dock worker who never came home. Life had never been merciful, but at least it was predictable. Work, sleep, survive. That was the rhythm I had known. And then, desperate for coin, I stepped into service at the Russo estate, thinking scrubbing their halls and carrying their tea would be better than starving. How naive. Within the mansion walls, I learned quickly that the Russo family wasn't just another household, it was a kingdom with bloodied crowns. The corridors were lined with secrets. The men carried pistols as naturally as forks. And women like me? We were nothing more than shadows that swept the floors after the storms. Still, I kept my head down, until Sebastiano decided I no longer could. The night it happened, I had been called to his private office with a simple order: bring him tea. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. But when I stepped inside, the door shut behind me with a click that sounded too final. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, papers scattered before him, his jacket discarded over the chair. The sight alone made my throat tighten. Men like him weren't meant to look so devastating while looking so lethal. Come here, he had said, voice low but unyielding. My feet moved on their own, carrying me forward like a string was tied around my waist. I placed the cup before him, eyes lowered, pulse wild, and then his hand, broad, strong, caught my wrist before I could step away. That was the beginning. If anyone asks, I can't say how it happened after that. Was it his authority that pulled me in? The danger in his eyes? Or the loneliness I tried to bury under the weight of servitude? All I know is that nights blurred into secrets, touches into fire, and the line between servant and mistress became one I didn't know how to walk anymore. But I do remember the moment my world shattered. It was weeks later, in the middle of one of his gatherings, with his men drinking, laughing too loud, throwing knives into the wooden walls. I was there, tray in hand, trying to disappear like always, and then, without warning, Sebastiano's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence. The room obeyed. Even the knives stopped midair. All eyes turned to him as he stood, glass of whiskey in one hand, his gaze burning holes straight into me. I froze. My heart climbed into my throat. He lifted his glass slowly, almost in a toast, and the next words he spoke ripped the world from under my feet. She's carrying my child. The room erupted. Shouts. Laughter. Questions hurled like bullets. My tray slipped from my hands, crashing to the ground, shattering porcelain and spilling tea that burned my ankles. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. His words echoed in my skull like a death sentence and a promise all at once. I hadn't even known yet, but Sebastiano Russo, Mafia boss, king of shadows, executioner of men, had just announced it to his entire empire, and I was the maid who had no way out. The room spun. Voices rose like thunder, harsh laughter mixing with angry shouts, disbelief echoing off the walls. I stood frozen, my body stiff with terror, the sharp sting of hot tea soaking into my stockings. Broken porcelain scattered at my feet like shards of my reality. "Boss! Surely you're joking!" one of his men barked, his voice tight with shock. "Her, the maid? She's nothing," another sneered, a cruel grin tugging at his lips. "Russo, you've lost your damn mind." But Sebastiano didn't flinch. He didn't explain, didn't argue. He simply lifted his glass again and drank, as though his words hadn't just detonated my life in front of dozens of men who would happily tear me apart for less. My heart was a frantic drum, my breath shallow. Every eye in that room was on me, piercing, dissecting. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped away the fragile veil I'd hidden behind for months. I don't... My words trembled out of me, but they drowned in the roaring sea of voices. Sebastiano's gaze snapped to me, sharp enough to slice, and then, with a deliberate calm that made my stomach twist, he gestured toward the door. Out, the room stilled. No one moved, no one breathed. His command was not for them. It was for me. My legs refused to move at first, but survival forced them forward. Step by step, I walked toward the heavy wooden doors, heat crawling up my neck. The silence was suffocating as every pair of eyes followed me, burning holes in my back. The moment the door shut behind me, my knees nearly gave out. My hands shook violently, my lungs refusing to find rhythm. What had he done? Why had he said that? The truth, that I hadn't even known, gnawed at me. Fear clamped around my ribs. But before I could collapse against the wall, the door opened again, and he was there. Sebastiano Russo filled the hallway like a storm in human form, his presence towering, his eyes unreadable. He shut the door with a soft click, trapping us in silence. What the hell was that? My voice came out hoarse, thin, but the fury under it surprised even me. He stepped closer, unhurried. "It was necessary." "Necessary?" My laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. "You just announced to everyone that I'm carrying your child."
"I didn't even know myself!"
He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You didn't need to." My mouth fell open. "You think you can just decide things like that?" "My life is not some pawn on your chessboard, Sebastiano." His jaw tightened. In 2 strides, he closed the distance between us until his shadow swallowed mine. His hand lifted, not to strike but to touch. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, his fingers grazing my skin with unbearable gentleness that contrasted the steel in his eyes. "Your life," he murmured, "became mine the moment you stepped into my bed." My chest constricted. The heat of his touch warred with the cold fury twisting in my gut. I should have slapped him, screamed at him, run. Instead, I stood trembling, caught between the man and the monster, between desire and dread. "You've ruined me," I whispered, my voice cracking. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or something softer, fleeting as lightning. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by the ruthless calm I'd come to know. "You'll thank me one day," he said simply, before stepping back. "Come, we have much to discuss." "No," I snapped, shaking my head. "You can't just pull me into this world, Sebastiano. I don't belong here." His lips curved, not in amusement, but in a bitter recognition. "That's where you're wrong. You belong to me now, and everyone in that room needed to know it." My stomach turned cold. Ownership, that's what it felt like. A cage disguised as protection. But when I opened my mouth to argue, the doors to the hall burst open. One of his men, dark-haired, frantic, rushed in. "Boss," he panted. "There's a problem. Outside. Rivals. They know." Sebastiano's expression hardened instantly, his hand tightening into a fist at his side. He gave a curt nod, dismissing the man, and then his eyes locked on me again. "Stay in your room. Do not leave until I say so." Before I could argue, he was gone, sweeping down the corridor with the storm following in his wake, leaving me trembling in the wreckage of his declaration. That night, I locked myself in my quarters, pacing like a trapped animal. My thoughts were a whirlpool. His words, his touch, the firestorm he had unleashed, they consumed me, and beneath the fear, a new dread grew, insidious and undeniable. What if he was right? What if I was carrying his child? I pressed my trembling hand against my stomach, my mind racing. It was impossible. It was madness, and yet, the memory of his breath on my skin, his weight over me, the nights we hadn't spoken but had burned, flashed behind my eyes. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, tears finally spilling over, because in that moment, I realized the truth I didn't want to face. If it was true, there would be no escape. Not from Sebastiano Russo, not from his empire, not from the fate he had chosen for me. Sleep was a stranger that night. I lay curled on the thin mattress in my small, suffocating quarters, staring at the cracked ceiling as the mansion groaned and breathed around me. Every creak of wood, every muffled shout in the distance, Every echo of hurried footsteps pulled me tighter into myself. But louder than the mansion was the storm inside my head. She's carrying my child. The words wouldn't leave me. They clung to my skin like blood that wouldn't wash off. Sebastiano had thrown them into the world, as if they were unshakable truth, as if his voice alone could shape reality. And maybe it could. In his world, what he said was law. But what about me? What about my choice? I pressed the heel of my palm against my stomach, biting down on a sob. Was it possible? I counted the nights, replayed every moment I had tried to bury beneath routine. My body felt the same, or maybe it didn't. I wasn't sure anymore. Panic blurred all reason. If it were true, everything I had known would end. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer have the safety of blending into corners. I would be marked, branded by him, carrying the future of a man whose life was built on blood and violence. And if it wasn't true, then why had he said it? Why had he chosen to chain me to him in front of everyone? A knock at my door made me flinch. My breath hitched as I scrambled upright. For a second I considered pretending I wasn't here, but then his voice slid through the wood like smoke. Elena, I froze. My fingers gripped the blanket so hard it tore. Open the door. I didn't move. I couldn't. My chest heaved, my heart hammering, until the silence stretched too long. And then, with a soft click, the lock turned. He had the key. Of course he did. The door opened, and there he was, Sebastiano Russo, in a black shirt rolled at the sleeves, his dark hair slightly mussed, as if the night itself had tugged at him. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, filling the room with his presence. I stumbled to my feet. You can't just... I can, he interrupted smoothly, his gaze sweeping over the room, over me, before settling with a quiet weight. And I will. Sit. No. My voice cracked, but I forced it louder. You don't get to order me like some soldier in your army. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? What you've done to my life? He didn't answer at first. He crossed the room, slow and deliberate, until he stood just an arm's reach away, his scent, smoke, leather, whiskey, wrapped around me, suffocating. I saved you, he said finally. Saved me? I laughed bitterly, blinking through hot tears. You've destroyed me. Everyone out there looks at me like I'm dirt, like I don't belong. And now you've painted a target on my back. Do you realize what they'll say? What they'll do to me if they think it's true? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, as if he couldn't quite understand the panic in my words. Or maybe he understood too well and simply didn't care. No one will touch you. His voice was low, dangerous. No one would dare. I shook my head furiously. That's not protection, Sebastiano. That's prison. I don't want this. Something flickered across his face then. Something sharp. Wounded, almost human, but it was gone in a breath. He reached out suddenly, his hand gripping my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. You may not want this, he murmured, his voice rougher now, but it's already set in motion. The moment you stepped into my world, Elena, there was no going back. My lips trembled. I wanted to scream, to claw at him, to break free of the cage he'd locked me in with nothing but words, but my body betrayed me, the heat rising in my chest, the shiver that ran down my spine under his touch, and he saw it. Of course he did. Why me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. My voice was small, raw. You could have anyone. Why me? For a moment, silence stretched between us. His thumb brushed against my jaw, almost absent-mindedly, and his eyes darkened with something I couldn't name. Because you look at me, he said finally, like I'm not just the devil everyone fears. You see the man, and I'll be damned before I let anyone else take that from me. My breath caught. His words sank like stones in water, unsettling everything I thought I knew about him, about us. Before I could respond, the sharp crack of gunfire split the night. My body jolted, panic flooding my veins. Sebastiano's hand dropped instantly, his face hardening into steel. He strode to the window, peering out, his shoulders tense. Stay here, he ordered, already reaching for the gun holstered at his side. The door burst open again, one of his men panting. Boss, ambush, they're on the grounds. Sebastiano cursed under his breath, his jaw tight. He shot me one last look, fierce, commanding, almost desperate. Don't move. And then he was gone, swallowed by the chaos outside, leaving me trembling in the silence of my little room. The echoes of gunfire shook the walls, each blast driving home a truth I couldn't ignore. Whatever this was, pregnancy or not, truth or lie, it had already bound me to him. And now, in the middle of a war I hadn't chosen, I realized the most terrifying thing of all. It wasn't just the Mafia world that would never let me go. It was Sebastiano Russo himself. The gunfire didn't stop. It rattled through the night like thunder, sharp cracks echoing against the stone walls of the mansion. My hands clutched the blanket on my bed until my knuckles whitened, my body frozen with terror. Shouts erupted outside my door, heavy boots pounding the floors, orders barked in voices strained with urgency. I told myself to stay put, to obey him, but every blast of a gunshot made me flinch. Every scream made my blood run colder. My room felt less like shelter, and more like a coffin waiting to close. The air was suffocating, thick with smoke creeping in from under the door. And then, the sharp sound of splintering wood ripped through the chaos. Not outside, inside. My heart lurched. The window. I turned just in time to see the glass shatter inward, shards raining across the floor like falling stars. A figure in black tumbled through, face masked, pistol already raised. I screamed. He didn't hesitate, his eyes locked on me, his hand steady. I pressed back against the wall, my breath tearing out in shallow gasps. The muzzle of the gun gleamed under the dim light, pointed straight at my chest, and then another sound, a deafening shot, but not from his gun. The man jerked violently, blood blooming across his shoulder. He staggered, dropping his weapon, and before I could process anything, Sebastiano was there, moving like a storm. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his gun raised, his expression murderous. Another shot. The intruder collapsed against the floorboards, his mask slipping off to reveal eyes wide with shock, then glassy with death. I couldn't breathe. My hands flew to my mouth, my entire body trembling so hard I thought I'd collapse. Sebastiano didn't spare the man another glance. He grabbed me instead, his grip fierce as he hauled me away from the shattered window. His other hand pressed against my cheek, scanning me with frantic precision, his chest rising and falling in harsh breaths. "Are you hurt?" His voice was sharper than the gunfire outside, demanding an answer. I shook my head, though tears blurred my vision, my throat too tight to speak. His eyes, usually cold, calculating, burned with something terrifying in its intensity. Fury, fear, possession. He pulled me against his chest suddenly, his arm wrapping around me so tightly I gasped. "I told you to stay safe," he growled into my hair. "If he had touched you..." His voice broke into a low curse, rough and jagged. I stiffened in his arms, torn between fear of the corpse still bleeding on my floor and the wild pounding of my heart against his chest. His warmth enveloped me, but it felt like fire, dangerous, consuming, inevitable. "This is exactly what I meant," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Your world, it will destroy me." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands still gripping my arms as though he feared I might disappear. "No," he said firmly, his gaze fierce. "I'll destroy anyone who tries to touch you." I wanted to push him away, to scream at him for dragging me into this nightmare, but my knees gave way instead. He caught me easily, his arms steady, his jaw tight with restraint. He lifted me as though I weighed nothing, carrying me from the room, past the broken glass and the body he didn't bother to hide. The hallway was chaos. Men rushed past with guns, blood smeared across their shirts, the metallic tang filling the air. But when they saw Sebastiano, when they saw me cradled in his arms, they all froze. Their eyes widened. Some bowed their heads. And in that moment, I understood. His declaration wasn't just words. He had claimed me, and now every man in this house knew it. He carried me into his private chambers, grand, dark, with velvet drapes and a fire still burning low in the hearth. He set me down on the edge of his bed, his hands lingering longer than they should, as though letting go was a risk he couldn't afford. "Stay here," he commanded again, his voice low and firm. I looked up at him, my tears finally breaking free, slipping hot down my cheeks. "Why me, Sebastiano? Why are you doing this to me?" He didn't answer right away. His hand lifted, brushing my tear away with his thumb, his expression unreadable. "Because in this house, everyone wants something. Money, power, revenge. And you," his voice softened for the first time, a raw edge cutting through the steel. "You were the only thing that wasn't meant for me, which makes me want you more." My chest tightened painfully, my body trembling between the pull of his words and the terror of what they meant. "I can't do this," I whispered, shaking my head. "I can't be part of your world." His gaze darkened, but not with anger, with resolve. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing mine, his voice a vow and a threat all at once. "You already are." The door burst open before I could respond. One of his lieutenants stepped in, blood splattered across his shirt, his face grim. "They've retreated for now, boss." But they knew exactly where to strike. Someone inside gave them the route. Sebastiano straightened, his entire body tense with fury. His eyes flicked to me briefly, protective, calculating. before returning to his man. "Find the traitor," he ordered coldly, "and make sure they never breathe again." The lieutenant nodded and left. The silence that followed pressed down on me, heavier than the smoke outside. Sebastiano turned back to me, his jaw clenched, his eyes still burning. "You see now," he said, softer this time, though no less intense. "You're safer with me than anywhere else. Even if you hate me for it." And the terrifying thing was, a part of me believed him. Morning arrived like an unwanted intruder. The mansion was eerily silent, but it wasn't peace. It was tension, heavy and suffocating, like the air before a storm. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the walls, the faint smears of blood on the marble floor a reminder of what had happened. Servants moved quickly, eyes lowered, voices hushed. No one looked at me, but I felt their stares burning into my back the moment I passed. I wasn't invisible anymore. Sebastiano had made sure of that. I sat on the edge of the grand bed in his chamber, wrapped in a blanket that still carried his scent. I hadn't returned to my small room. He hadn't let me. After carrying me here during the chaos, he had refused to release me back into the corridors. His words still echoed in my head. "You're safer with me than anywhere else." Safe. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like a cage, but I stayed. Because as much as I hated it, the shattered window in my room and the dead man sprawled across the floor were proof that danger had already found me, and worse than the fear gnawing at me was the gnawing possibility I couldn't silence. What if I was pregnant? My hand drifted unconsciously to my stomach again, my fingers curling against the thin fabric of the nightgown I'd changed into. My body offered no answers, no signs, no certainty, just a void where panic filled the gaps. If Sebastiano was right, then everything had already changed. The door opened without a knock. Sebastiano strode in, his dark shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, a pistol still holstered at his hip. He carried power with him like a second skin, his presence swallowing the room. I looked away quickly, tightening the blanket around myself. "You haven't eaten," he said, his voice low, matter of fact. "I'm not hungry." He studied me for a long moment, then walked over to the table near the window, where a silver tray waited with untouched food. With deliberate calm, he lifted a piece of bread and placed it on a plate, carrying it toward me. I recoiled instinctively, shaking my head. I said, "I'm not hungry." He crouched down in front of me, the plate balanced in one hand, his eyes locking onto mine with unnerving intensity. "Starving yourself won't change anything, Elena. If you're carrying my child, you'll eat. If you're not, you'll eat because I said so." My throat tightened. Anger and fear collided, twisting inside me until I thought I'd choke. "You can't control me like this," I whispered. "Yes, I can," he replied simply. The bluntness of it stole the breath from my lungs. He didn't even pretend otherwise, didn't hide behind sweet lies or false tenderness. He laid his claim bare, unapologetic. "You're mine now," he continued, softer but deadlier. "And whether you like it or not, that means you obey me. Not because I want to cage you, but because the world outside these walls will destroy you the moment you step away from me." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You've already destroyed me, Sebastiano. Don't you see that?" For a heartbeat, silence. Then his jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. He set the plate down beside me and stood, towering over me with a storm in his expression. "You think you're broken because of me?" His voice dropped, low and raw. "No, Elena, you're alive because of me." I flinched at the sharpness of his tone, but something else flickered underneath it, something that felt almost like desperation. He reached down suddenly, his fingers brushing the back of my hand before curling around it firmly. His warmth bled into my skin, steady and unyielding. "I will not lose you," he said, his voice fierce, almost aching. My breath caught. My heart betrayed me, thundering in my chest, even as my mind screamed to pull away. But his grip was strong, his eyes burning with a conviction that terrified me more than his violence ever could. Because what scared me wasn't his claim. It was the part of me that wanted to believe him. The day dragged on with unbearable heaviness. The mansion tightened like a clenched fist. Guards posted at every door, whispers of betrayal slithering through the halls. A traitor had let the rivals inside, and Sebastiano's men hunted them with cold precision. The air reeked of fear, not just mine, but everyone's. I kept to his chambers, pacing restlessly, torn between the suffocating safety he offered and the desperate longing to escape. Every time I approached the door, one of his guards stood there, expression unreadable, blocking my path. I was trapped. By evening, Sebastiano returned again, his shirt stained faintly with blood, his knuckles bruised. He looked exhausted, yet his gaze sharpened the moment it landed on me, as if checking that I was still here. "Still his. You haven't left," he said quietly. I laughed bitterly. As if I could, he stepped closer, unbuttoning his cuffs with slow precision. "I meant what I said. No one will touch you. No one will take you from me. I turned away, hugging myself. And what if I want to be taken? What if I don't want this life? Silence pressed heavy between us. Then I felt him move, his presence behind me like a shadow swallowing the light. His hand slid gently to my waist, his breath grazing my ear. "You'll learn to want it," he whispered. My eyes fluttered shut, my body trembling. His words sank deep, terrifying and intoxicating all at once. And in that moment, I realized the truth I couldn't deny any longer. It wasn't just his world I was trapped in. It was him. The days that followed felt like years. Time blurred inside the mansion, each hour stretching like a taut string ready to snap. Guards stood watch outside the doors. Whispers slithered through the halls about traitors and ambushes. And everywhere I went, eyes followed me. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was the boss's possession. His secret, his claim, and maybe his future. That thought gnawed at me relentlessly. Every morning, I woke with a tightness in my stomach, nausea creeping into my throat. At first, I told myself it was nerves, fear twisting my body into knots. But as the days passed, excuses grew harder to hold on to. The faint dizziness, the way my appetite shifted, the heaviness I couldn't explain. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my abdomen in the privacy of the bathroom. My reflection in the cracked mirror stared back at me with wide, frightened eyes. What if he was right? I whispered. The words fogged the glass, fragile as breath. If I was pregnant, then there was no escape, no chance of disappearing back into the shadows. I would be tied to him forever, not just in whispers but in blood. A knock jolted me from my thoughts. Elena, his voice again. Always his voice. I splashed water on my face quickly, forcing myself to breathe before stepping out. Sebastiano was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his shirt black and crisp, his tie loosened. His gaze swept over me with that same piercing intensity that made me feel stripped bare. "You're pale," he said quietly. "I'm fine." My reply was too quick, too brittle. He tilted his head, studying me. "You're lying." "I'm not." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he pushed off the frame and stepped closer, his hand reaching for my chin, tilting it gently upward so I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You're hiding something," he murmured. My pulse thundered. Did he know? Could he tell? I shoved his hand away, my voice trembling but sharp. "You can't control everything, Sebastiano. Not me. Not this." His jaw clenched, the muscle ticking. "Everything that concerns you concerns me." I laughed bitterly, the sound cracking in my throat. "Of course it does. Because you've made sure I have nothing that's mine anymore. Not even myself." His eyes darkened, but instead of anger, something else flickered there, something raw. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his composure faltering just enough for me to see the man beneath the mask. "You think I wanted this?" His voice was low, rough, almost vulnerable. "You think I planned to drag you into this world?" Into me I froze. The honesty in his tone cut deeper than his control ever had. "I didn't," he admitted, his gaze distant for once. "I never wanted anyone tied to me. This life, it kills everything it touches. I should have left you where you were, invisible, safe." My throat tightened. For the first time, he wasn't speaking like a boss or a captor. He was speaking like a man haunted by his own chains. "Then why didn't you?" I asked softly. His eyes returned to mine, fierce again, burning. "Because I couldn't." The confession hung between us, heavy and dangerous. My chest constricted, torn between fury and a pull I couldn't deny. I hated him for what he'd done, for the claim, the control, the prison he'd built around me. But in that moment, I also saw the cracks in his armor, the loneliness that shadowed him, the hunger that had nothing to do with power. And that terrified me more than his threats ever had, because it meant a part of me wanted to reach through those cracks. That evening, the mansion grew restless again. Whispers of retaliation, of rival families regrouping, slithered through the air. Sebastiano was called to his study, his men circling like wolves as strategies were drawn. I remained in his chamber, pacing, suffocating under the weight of uncertainty. My body betrayed me again, the nausea, the weakness. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching my stomach, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. I couldn't keep ignoring it. I needed answers. Before I could spiral further, the door opened and Sebastiano entered, his expression carved from stone. He closed the door, locking it behind him, and for a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. Then he spoke. "I know you're scared." The admission startled me. His tone wasn't commanding this time. It was steady, almost gentle. "I don't want your fear," he continued, stepping closer. "I want your trust, even if I don't deserve it." I swallowed hard, my voice a whisper. And what if I can't give it? He stopped just in front of me, his hand hovering over my cheek before finally resting there, warm and steady. Then I'll keep you safe until you can. His words sank deep, curling into the hollow spaces inside me. I hated how they made me ache, how they softened the edges of my anger, how they made me want to believe him. But beneath it all, one truth gnawed louder than anything else. If I was carrying his child, trust wouldn't matter. Choice wouldn't matter. I would belong to him forever. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. The mansion felt smaller with each hour, its walls closing in like a vice, guards at every door, whispers slithering under the floorboards, Sebastiano's men moving like shadows, and me, pacing his chamber like a caged animal. My hands pressed to my stomach as nausea churned again and again. I had to know whether he was right, whether my body had already tied me to him forever. But I couldn't ask him, not Sebastiano. If he didn't already know, he'd find out soon enough. And if he did know, asking would only give him more power over me. I needed to find out myself, quietly, secretly. I waited until late afternoon, when the mansion was at its busiest. Meetings were underway, men coming and going from Sebastiano's office like tides, their voices low and urgent. Outside the windows, cars moved in and out of the driveway, bringing crates, papers, deals sealed in blood. I slipped into the adjoining bathroom, locking the door behind me. My fingers trembled as I dug through the drawers beneath the marble sink, rifling past brushes and towels until I found the small first aid box, bandages, antiseptic, and a folded slip of paper with the phone number of a doctor scrawled on it. I stared at the number, my pulse hammering. A doctor. If I could get a message out, just one, I could find out for sure. I could reclaim at least one truth for myself. I tore the slip of paper free, tucking it into the pocket of my dress. That evening, Sebastiano returned from whatever war he was waging behind closed doors. His shirt was crisp, but his sleeves were rolled up, revealing bruised knuckles. He smelled of smoke and rain, like a storm had followed him in. "You're quiet," he said, watching me from the doorway. "I'm tired," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the book in my lap, though I couldn't read a single word of it. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the room, as always. "You've been pale all day." "Sick." I said I'm fine. He crouched in front of me suddenly, forcing my gaze to his. "I know you're hiding something." My stomach twisted. His eyes were too sharp, too perceptive. Did he know about the paper in my pocket? Did he know what I was planning? "I'm not," I whispered, praying my voice didn't shake. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he reached out, brushing a thumb across my jaw, the touch both tender and possessive. "Don't keep secrets from me, Elena. It won't end well." Fear flared hot under my ribs, but I managed a nod, my lips pressed tight. That night, after he'd left for another late meeting, I crept from the room. The guards outside Sebastiano's chamber stiffened at my appearance, but didn't stop me. They knew I was hers now, and apparently that was enough. I kept my head down as I crossed the hall, slipping into a narrow corridor that led to the servants' wing. My heart pounded with every step. If Sebastiano caught me, there'd be no explaining. In the small, dim kitchen, I found Maria, one of the older maids who'd worked in the Russo mansion far longer than I had. Her eyes widened as soon as she saw me. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed softly, glancing toward the door. "He said, I need a favor." I cut her off, my voice low and urgent. "I need you to make a call for me. To this number." I slipped the paper from my pocket, my hands shaking. Maria stared at the slip, then back at me, her brow furrowed. "A doctor?" I nodded. I need to know. Please." Her expression softened, pity flickering in her eyes. She took the paper, hiding it quickly in her apron. "I'll see what I can do. But you're playing a dangerous game, Nina. If he finds out." "I know," I whispered. I turned to leave, but stopped at her next words. "He cares for you," Maria said quietly. "More than he should." I almost laughed, but it came out like a sob. "That's not care, that's ownership." Maria didn't answer. She just gave me a look I couldn't decipher, then moved to the phone tucked into the corner of the kitchen. Back in his room, I curled into a tight ball on the bed, my stomach churning. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. Every creak of the floorboards felt like the prelude to his footsteps. When Sebastiano returned, hours later, he didn't speak at first. He simply shut the door behind him, his jacket slung over his shoulder. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're restless," he said finally. "I told you, I'm tired." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across me. "You're lying to me." I forced myself to meet his eyes, even as my heart raced. "Maybe I am. Maybe you don't get to know everything. For the first time, something like surprise flickered across his face. Then, instead of anger, a slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "Careful," he murmured. "You're learning to bite." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "But remember, wolves bite back harder." I shivered under his touch, but I didn't look away. Not this time, because for the first time since he dragged me into his world, I had something he didn't know, a secret of my own. And if the doctor confirmed what I feared, that secret would change everything. The next morning, the world felt different. The air in the mansion was thick with something I couldn't name. Anticipation, dread, maybe both. I tried to keep my movements normal, serving breakfast, pouring tea, folding linens like the maid I used to be, but my body betrayed me. Every step felt heavier, every glance from the guards sharper, and Maria's eyes kept flicking toward me, weighted with a secret she hadn't yet spoken. By noon, she caught me in the corridor, her voice a rushed whisper as she pressed a folded note into my hand. "He answered," she said, her voice shaking. "The doctor, he said he can meet you, but it has to be discreet. Late tonight. If anyone finds out." My fingers clenched around the paper, my pulse roaring in my ears. This was it, the chance to know, to rip away the fog of not knowing, even if the truth would shatter me. "Thank you," I whispered, shoving the note into my pocket before anyone could see. But already, I could feel him. Sebastiano, like the walls themselves carried his awareness, like his shadow never really left me. That evening, he summoned me to his study. The room was dimly lit, papers scattered across his desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey catching the glow of the chandelier. He sat behind the desk, his jacket draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the veins in his forearms. He didn't look up when I entered. His voice was low, measured. "Sit." I obeyed, my legs trembling as I lowered myself into the chair opposite him. Finally, his gaze lifted, pinning me with that sharp, merciless focus that saw too much. "You've been busy." My throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean." His lips curved in something between a smirk and a snarl. "You think I don't notice when someone moves differently in my house? When the air shifts?